Wiring, and lots of it. We're tackling all of the extraneous wiring to go with all the accessories that I have put on this bike, and it's a lot of them. I also finally make a pad so I can ride much more comfortably. We have a lot to cover in this one, so let's go. I know that it's a miracle that I'm finally finished with painting, but I didn't put on all the painted parts, so here are the front fork covers that I'm just throwing on here. Pretty straightforward. After I did my dash testing in the last episode, I realized that the labels that I made for my acrylic pieces do not line up with what the functions of those potentiometers are. Of course, I can easily just recut a new piece of acrylic to line up with the pots, but I think I'm just going to do it the hard way, and that is realign my potentiometers with the labeling on the front. I could just leave it and probably nobody would notice, but when you turn green, it's actually going to change the color red, and that would bother me. And I also wanted to read red, green, blue. If it's RGB, it just makes sense to me, and call me crazy, but I just wanted to be that way. But because of that, that meant I needed to lengthen 9 of these wires, and it's not even that much more length, but it is enough to make it actually work and sit correctly. During my testing, I also realized that the front switch labels do not match up with what they're doing, and I do want them in a sequence as well, so I have to swap the outside ones with each other, so I'm just doing that right now. Things can happen like this when you're reusing equipment from a previous project, so this is the second iteration of this bike, and I already had a dashboard kind of laid out that was similar but not exactly the same. And after all my desoldering and resoldering, everything works and it is in the correct place, so now it's time to do a bit of cleanup and make these wires a little more presentable, even though you're not really going to see them. This panel is going to be modular because I've routed everything through this 8-pin connector with the exception of one component, which I could have done, but I wanted to dedicate more of the larger power wires to the more powerful components, so the only other connector that I have is this tiny little connector that goes to the battery meter readout. I had to modify this wire because when it is going to be installed in the dashboard, there are going to be so many components in the way that there's almost no way I'm going to be able to plug it in while all the other components are installed. So I'm just having this jump wire always be connected into the LCD readout, and it's going to have its own connector on it which I can plug into the battery. It's not too big of a deal to have 2 connectors instead of 1 because I'm not going to be taking off this dashboard all that much, but it will be handy in the times that I need to. I've also leveled up to using this cotton tape instead of just wrapping everything in electrical wires. I really like the black aesthetic so much more than the jumbled mess of crazy colors, and this fabric tape not only looks better but is so much cleaner if you have to remove it. It pretty much only sticks to itself and leaves no kind of sticky residue behind on all your wiring. My next task was trying to fit all of these components into the dashboard and have it be fully enclosed because I can't just have a bunch of wires hanging out of it, so I have to do some pretty tricky arranging and getting everything to fit inside all sealed up. I did brainstorm a bunch of ideas on how I wanted to affix the LED controller to the actual frame. I thought about screwing it in. I thought about 3D printing my own special bracket for it, since I have a 3D printer now, although I figured all of these might be overkill because I really just needed to hold in place and I don't need to really remove it or add it again later, so I'm just gonna hot glue it inside. I'm continually impressed with how useful hot glue is. It is very strong and it will almost stick to anything. Another benefit of hot glue is that it is a great insulator, so when you're using it on these electrical components, you don't have to worry about them touching or shorting out on the metal frame. I wasn't quite sure on where to put this voltmeter readout. It wasn't going to work in the original location that I had it. I tried to put it in the front here, but it was just kind of getting in the way. It was going to interfere with the labels on the front, and I also had this kind of switch holder bracket, and that wasn't going to work with it physically, so I decided to put it on the side here and it fits much better. I also made these little acrylic switch brackets that hold the switches in their perfect up and down orientation. Normally you'd have the clamping force of the threads holding everything in tight, but I don't want to stress the acrylic because anytime you have a hole and a lot of pressure you can introduce cracks, and I didn't want that to happen. The brackets just hold the switches in so it's always an up and down motion instead of them getting maybe a little offset and then maybe turning to the left or the right and having them not be uniform. The brackets just hold everything in place. And this is the new spot for the voltmeter, and I think it's going to work much better in this area than trying to fit it in the front. On the previous iteration of this bike, I did have a ton of LED strips that I wanted to carry over to this build, although I did have to cut them out from the previous build. And I even added a few more, so they all have to converge into one, which goes into that 8-pin connector, which then goes to the LED controller. And every time I make a bike with a ton of LEDs on it, I get to this point and I wonder why I put so many LEDs on my bike, even though it does look very cool and you can always turn them off if you don't want an RGB look. Although I was a bit smarter this time and I left a lot more room for the leads because it does allow things to be soldered much more easily and to separate the wires after you solder them so they're not all touching, adding some insulation, just making sure everything is not going to short out or cause problems later on down the road. I could have used a distribution block, that would have helped down at least on this part of it, but I also don't have a ton of room, so I'm trying to get everything as small as I possibly can. I also was thinking of switching up the headlight, although this headlight not only is super bright, it works extremely well and I think it looks really cool. I was trying to find some smaller connectors if I had any, but these XT60s are way too overkill for just this headlight connection, but they're the best 2-pin connectors that I had, and I also had a bunch of them, so that's what I'm using. One benefit of using the XT60s is that they fit very tightly, so I don't have to worry about the connection coming out if I'm going over some bumps. And I just finished it off with some sleeving and that fabric tape, and I think it looks pretty good. The only thing I don't like about these connectors is the color, but if you wrap the tape in such a way, you can get it so that that color disappears. Now onto the charge port install. I did buy this very premium connector. I think this thing was like $20, which is a lot for one connector, but it does look very nice and it functions very well. You definitely don't need anything like this. It's crazily overkill just for a charge port. You could just have a lead coming out of the bottom of the bike, but I already had a hole in the frame and I had to fill it, so I might as well make it look nice while I'm at it. This is the first time I'm connecting this whole dashboard to the battery pack, so I'm just hoping that everything works and nothing explodes, so let's try it out. It does look like everything's working and there is no smoke or flames exiting from the frame of the bike, which I am very happy about. I was thinking there was going to be at least one switch or knob that wasn't working correctly, but I think I got pretty much everything after all of that surgery with all those wires. Everything is working on the bike, including the headlight and taillight. I am super stoked at this point. I cannot contain myself. I just want to keep going, but I have more LED strips to add. I wasn't quite sure how the illumination from within the dashboard exiting, bouncing off the reflectivity of the battery was going to look. I didn't know if I wanted these strips facing inward or downward. After checking it out on the bike, I figured the downward position was going to be better because it did illuminate some more of the sides as well as getting that reflectivity off of the battery. I think this is the best position, so that's what we're going for. These two large strips are going to be contained within the dashboard part, so they're not going to have to go through any connectors or anything. I am going to make them a bit longer, so I do need to add some extension wires, which I'm doing right here. I probably should have added some insulation before even coating these in hot glue, but I guess I figured I was going to put enough glue that there was going to be no chance of any shorting out. I did check this multiple times after just to make sure, but I think I probably should have added just a little bit more insurance on my part, so in the future I will be wrapping those ends first before hot gluing them down. Before, I would be finding some way to engineer zip ties holding these down, but that was going to be a problem with the acrylic fitting so closely and it wasn't going to look as nice, so here it is, hot glue with another win for this project. I was going to mount these one underneath the seat much closer to the center line, but because I want to also put the rear brake light, I didn't want that to obstruct any of the lighting. So that's why I put them kind of in the middle, which is actually going to work out better. This is the only section of LEDs on the bike that is not indirect lighting, but it will be indirect after I do the modification, but that's going to come in the next episode. So right now it just looks like a strip of LEDs pointed up to directly blind you in your eyes and look terrible, but I promise it is not going to look like this. There will be some diffusion happening, that's why those brackets are there, but I'll just have to show you next time what my plans are for this strip. One area that was giving me some trouble was this controller cover that I have created. It didn't quite want to fit with this giant cable, but I finally figured out a way to get it to work. It was looking like this cable wanted to attack the controller cover and possibly break it, so I think if I ever get around to another iteration of this bike, this controller cover will be made out of metal strictly for that reason. I should have just welded some tabs on that I could add even more zip ties to get this cable under control. I did get it to work, but it was pretty difficult. Now the challenge is trying to stuff all of this wiring and everything and get it to sit at least flush so that the dashboard can go on top of it. This was also quite a challenge. I just have so much stuff that needs to be packed in here. It's like stuffing a turkey. It does fit, but barely. I don't have a whole lot of room for moving stuff around, but it does all fit, which I am thankful for. I definitely didn't want to weed out any more wiring and try to trim it down because it was already a lot and pretty overwhelming, so I'm just very glad that it all fit. Now that I know that it all fits, I can start cleaning up even more inside of the dashboard, routing the wires, getting them all cleaned up, and then trying to add the rear brake light. I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to put this. I tried to put it inside of that little triangle area. I tried putting it all the way to the end. I tried putting it in the middle, kind of like where it is, and I just wasn't really happy with it. I even thought about not even having a tail light because when you have this many LEDs, you don't really need one. Anyone in the dark is going to be able to see you. But I did find a spot for it and I'm pretty happy with that. I think I have some shots of it later, but this is the first time that the bike has been together this much with the dash, all the lighting and everything, and I was super happy to be at this point. With every piece that I'm adding towards the completion of this bike, I think it's just looking cooler and cooler. All the elements coming together, the lighting, the dashboard, that's where I put the rear light. I think it looks really good right there. Just the whole thing, I'm getting even more excited to complete this build. At this point in the build, I am super happy with how this is turning out. It looks better than I ever could imagine, and we're not even done yet. The last part of progress that I stuffed into the end of this video is finally getting around to adding some sort of padding to the seat here. I thought of a bunch of different solutions to this problem, and the one that I kept coming back to was just wanting something very kind of simple and minimalistic. The only issue is that I've never really made a seat before, and I've never really worked with foam like this, so if it doesn't execute very well, it's not because the design is bad, it's just because my execution might be bad. Because of that, I'm not super confident that it is going to come out the way that I wanted to, but I figured I'll at least try it, and if I don't like it, I can always change it later. I was already having some issues because this stuff is very hard to cut, and when you cut it with the scissors you can see all of your lines where you're like making a new snip. I tried using a razor blade and just cutting it with one fell swoop, but that wasn't going to work either, so I'm gonna have to try and clean this up a little bit, and it actually worked really well with the flap disc. I don't think these pieces are going to be necessarily put in any showrooms or museums, but it does look a lot better than those cut lines. It is much smoother, and I'm actually not terribly upset with how this came out. It still looks a bit rough around the edges, but it is a lot better than I actually thought I was even going to make, so I figured I'd just continue along. This is also kind of an experiment to just see how durable this foam is just exposed. I can definitely cover it with some vinyl and stuff like that, which you would normally do on a seat. I do kind of like the minimalist, kind of lightweight looking feel of the exposed foam, so I did want to try it like that, but if it starts crumbling and falling to pieces or just ripping off of the bike frame, then I certainly will change it up. I might even change the whole entire seat design later on anyway, so this portion of it is kind of just like a work in progress. Although I was pretty surprised at just how smooth that I could get it, because in my head I was thinking there's no way I'm gonna make this look even halfway decent. I'm gonna see a bunch of cut lines and it's just gonna look very rough. I also thought that this bevel I was gonna put on would be crazily uneven, but it's actually not too bad. It's not perfect by any means, but it's not too bad. I'm also going to be experimenting with how much or how little I can get away with without these pads just kind of ripping off or coming off in the heat. I don't know how well these are gonna hold up. I'm just using some hot glue and also some spray mount, and hopefully that's going to be enough, but we will find out. I actually really like the look of the single layer, but I know on those longer rides I'm going to be very thankful that I have 2 layers instead of 1, even though aesthetically it definitely does not look as good as 1 layer. I could have gotten away with it and it would have looked a lot better, but this is definitely going to be a lot more comfortable. I already have 3 other ways that I can make these not only look a lot better but also mount a lot more strongly, but this is just a test. I want to see if this is going to last a day, a week, a month. I'm not sure. I just want to test these materials and see how durable they are. Honestly, I'm not super happy with how these came out. Of course, I want it to look so much better and more perfect, which I could do by wrapping it. I could take it to a professional upholsterer. I could do a bunch of stuff, but for now, I am at least 80% happy with it, so I'm gonna live with it for now. With the 2 pads, it is surprisingly comfortable, so it is very nice to sit on. I wish I could get away with just 1 pad because it does look a lot better in my opinion, but we have to make some sacrifices here and there for at least the usability of the bike. I am super happy to be at this point though. Everything on the bike is working correctly. All the lighting is working. I can actually sit down and have it be comfortable now. I am super happy to be at this point in the progress. We are getting dangerously close to finishing off this build. I think in the next one that's going to be it, the finale. So I am super excited and happy about that. I hope you guys are too. There's honestly not much left to do on the bike, just some aesthetic mods. There's going to be some more panels that I have to make, and there's a few little odds and ends as well, but we're going to tie it all in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. But I am curious on what you guys think of the build so far. Would you change anything? What do you think of these seat pads? Would you do them differently? Would you get them professionally upholstered? Let me know in the comments because I'm really curious, and depending on your feedback, I might change them up in the next episode. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. This was a super long one. I tried to get through all of the wiring and get that out of the way so we can do all the funner stuff in the next and final episode. I am super excited to show you guys the finale of this build. It is finally going to be over. Stay tuned for that one. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.